You're listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. In cooperation with MissioAlliance.org, straight from my house in Austin, Texas to yours, interviews with leading Christian authors, leaders, and thinkers, because good theology should be for everyone. This is Seminary Dropout. Let's go! My guest today is Dr. Shawn Duncan. Shawn is the Director of Training and Education for Focus Community Strategies, a Christian community development organization that's been partnering with distressed urban neighborhoods in Atlanta for the last 40 years. He's also the co-founder of EIRO, which serves as a catalyst for local churches eager to participate more fully in the mission of God in their local context. Shawn, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, man, it's an honor to be asked. I look forward to the conversation.
Like I mentioned just a second ago in your bio, you are a part of Focus Community Strategies organization. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what FCS does, how they help churches, nonprofits, and other organizations.
Yeah, so FCS is a community development organization that takes a look at poverty in a more systemic way. Instead of kind of engaging individuals with kind of presenting needs, they take a look at whole communities and how the dynamics of neighborhood and environment affect poverty and affect how families are able to find pathways towards flourishing. And so for the last 38 years or so, they've been partnering with different neighborhoods in Atlanta, just doing neighborhood revitalization, community development, economic development. And so part of what they're transitioning to do, which is why I came on staff just a couple of months ago, is due to Bob Lupton's books, the things that he's written, and also FCS's legacy of doing really healthy community development work. They get a lot of emails and phone calls and requests from churches and nonprofits who are saying, hey, we're trying to figure this stuff out too. Can you guys help us out? And of course, they're doing community development, so they're overwhelmed with just working in the neighborhood. And so they designed some open house experiences a few times throughout the year for people to come and visit, hear Bob do some speaking and teaching. Other staff members and neighbors of FCS would speak about different things that they do, just to kind of give people some exposure to what they do and help them out a little bit. But they discovered that they want to respond more directly to the opportunity to help teach and to help train about healthy charity and about community development. And so I came on board on July 6th to help them kind of build out essentially School for Community Development that's yet to be named, but we're kind of in the visioning stages of what that can look like, to provide a center for people to come to, or to hire people to come to them, just to help them along the path of thinking about doing charity in a more holistic way, or if those that are ready to practice some real community development can find the resources for that as well.
Cool. So that School for Community Development, that would be for people who want to do community development. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, either those that are more prepared to get involved with housing, economic development, community development along those lines, or just your average nonprofit that is just looking to engage the under-resourced families in their community in ways that are more reciprocal and empowering, and are just looking for further training to kind of make that a reality. So it's partial training on just healthier, more responsible models of charity, and the other part would be helping people engage in community development work.
So I'm wondering if you could walk us through the actual, boots on the ground steps that FCS takes. There's an underserved neighborhood there in Atlanta. What does FCS do from there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the first things and most important values for FCS when it comes to that particular conversation is the invitation. FCS does not enter into a community unless they're invited to be there by that community. Because they, as you can kind of see in their mission statement, it begins with saying they partner with underserved communities. And so this is not about an organization coming in to save or to rescue or to kind of be the ones that are the champions or are the heroes of the day. Now, they certainly play a really significant role in that process, but they see themselves as a player, a neighbor, along the way, and certainly not the sole driver for that. So the first part is really is the invitation piece of that and so right now they're working in South Atlanta, which is not it's not a directional statement. That's actually the name of a historic African American neighborhood that's just south of the Capitol in the city of Atlanta. So they've been there for let's see, I guess it's been over 13 years, I think, been in this particular neighborhood. And before they entered in, they had conversations with some long-term neighbors that have lived in that community their whole life, that were in a kind of a neighborhood association together. And they said, "Yeah, we want you here. We want to work together to rebuild our neighborhood." And so that's really kind of part one of what they do. And they have kind of a 7-phase process, and we won't spend our time like digging into deep to all of that. But kind of in general terms, it really begins with just doing some healthy assessment, doing a lot of listening and conversation. We've out of the work that we've been doing for this amount of time, we are now able to have developed a flourishing neighborhood index, which is like a brand new tool that we're still developing that can help us and help others who want to do this kind of work take a more strategic step process through how do we really take a look at what is going on in the neighborhood and how we get a handle on some of that. So, but first is invitation. The second is just doing really good, healthy listening. What is going on in the neighborhood? What does need to be done? Where are the strongest areas for impact? Where are some possibilities? So just looking at feasibility of these things, like what resources currently exist in the neighborhood that we could partner with to make some of these things happen. And then it's just the process of engaging the community, looking for leaders within the community, looking for resources from outside the community. How can we partner these things together? And then enter into a planning process. What can be done? What needs to be done? How can we do it together? Then executing that. Then as it's executed, there's always a feedback loop. Like, well, what's working? What's not working? It is never a clean process. I think one of the reasons that traditional charity is that it tends to be cleaner and simpler. People need, XYZ resource. We ask for XYZ donations and we give XYZ to those people. And it's very clean and kind of one way and a little bit more measurable. And so community development's a much more ongoing, kind of organic process that just takes a lot of build, plan, execute, get some feedback, reevaluate, replan, rebuild, and so that's it's kind of the process at which FCS engages a neighborhood.
Well, so a lot of what FCS is about, and the founder Bob Lupton that you mentioned, is kind of deconstructing the way charities have worked before, and you kind of alluded to that.
Right.
It seems like a lot of, and the new book that's just been published that Bob Lupton wrote, Charity Detox. Sorry, I get the two confused because the first one was Toxic Charity, right?
Right.
Yeah, and those are kind of those two kind of go together really too. They complement each other. A lot of what that is about is defining new metrics of,
right.
I don't even know if success is the right word, but metrics of doing good. And one of the things that Bob talks about is measuring. Currently, we measure activities versus impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to locate that concept into a very specific, identifiable ministry. So food pantries are pretty common. And if you're running a food ministry, you have in some way become aware that in your community there are families who are facing food insecurity. And so a common way of doing that is say, well, let's collect food donations from local businesses or churches or whomever, put it in a centralized location. And so if anybody kind of knocks on the door of a local church or a business and need some food, send them to us and we'll provide them with groceries free of charge. And to measure that, you would tend to say, this month or this week or this year, whatever your time frame is, we have handed out, 700 pounds of food, or we have served, 57 families, or we have logged 2,000 volunteer hours. And so those are all ways of kind of measuring activity. Here are the pounds of goods that have been distributed. Here are the hours at which volunteers have been at work. Here are the number of people that we have been able to serve. But if you're asking about measuring impact, the metric would be how many of those families that came to us in a position of food insecurity are no longer food insecure. They are now thriving. They are now stable to be able to provide the resources that their family needs as far as food is concerned. And so that's kind of asking a question of growth or empowerment or change, not how much did we distribute to that person. So activity is hours of service or pounds of food handed out. Impact would be how many families are no longer in need of charity to be able to make it to the end of the month with their food budget.
The question I want to ask is why we've measured activities versus impact, but I think part of the answer to that is obvious, and that's because it's harder.
Yeah.
It's easier to give a bunch of stuff
Right.
away, but it seems
Yeah.
like when you measure impact, if you get impact, that usually requires a lot more close involvement in people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because when so you say you've got, a family that you're encountering, if it appears that they need food and you give them food, um, it seems like it's a win it feels like a win for everybody. You were helpful and you wanted to be helpful. You had compassion. You were able to exercise that compassion in a tangible way. That family was in need. They no longer have that need, and so um, that's a sustainable model in some ways, because I can come the third Thursday of every month I can show up and serve, or the fourth Sunday of every month I can drop off my donations or whatever. But once we collapse that relational distance, all of a sudden we have to ask the question, why aren't they able to have enough groceries for their family? I mean, I have two sons, a wife, and I'm kind of thinking like, we are we're by no means just swimming in wealth, but I've never not had food to serve my kids. And if we didn't have food, it's because we just hadn't. We've been too lazy to go to the grocery store, and so we go to Chick-fil-A for dinner. Like the food insecurity has never been an issue for me, and so like, but if it were, what I would want is an answer to whatever problem is behind the reason I can't feed my kids. What I wouldn't want is just perpetual donations of free food, but never addressing whatever that problem might be. And it may be a health crisis, it may be a job crisis, it could be all kinds of things. But when we collapse that relational distance, it does become much more complicated, and we realize that whatever presenting symptom of poverty that we see is just that, it's a presenting symptom. There's other things that are going on, and so it immediately becomes complicated, which is why one of FCS's driving principles, whether you're just talking about charity in general or you're talking about their model of engaging a neighborhood, is that it's relational. That they part of their strategic model is inviting neighbors to relocate into that community to take part in what's going on. Because when we become neighbors to those that we seek to serve, everything changes. what we thought was a problem is no longer a problem. What we thought was normal seems no longer normal. I mean, just all of those things begin to change, because it's not the poor we're dealing with, it's Steve that we're dealing with, and all of a sudden it's a whole other ball game. And it does become much more complex, but you also begin to be made aware of what paths forward may actually look like, and that's when it can become exciting. It's much more long term. It's much more time and resource intensive. It is much more complex, but it also is much more exciting and hopeful, because you see that family not just showing up dejected receiving that free bag. You see that family saying, I don't need your free bag anymore because I've got the job that I need, or I've dealt with this housing issue that's been hanging over my family for years, or this major debt crisis is no longer just sucking the life out of our family. So whatever that thing happens to be, it now gets addressed, and you're seeing families thrive. And that's why, like in the mission statement for FCS, they talk about wanting to see families flourish. They want to see God's shalom being present. They're not interested in just distributing resources. They want to see the fullness of life that God intended for people being experienced together and not from a distance. And so we talk some about proximity disorder, that part of the reason our charity efforts are suffering is because they suffer from a proximity disorder, that we don't really know the people that we seek to serve. And so we want to honor that compassion that makes people want to serve. We want to honor that willingness to invest time and resources and energy and loving other people. But we want to say, let's do that from a position of neighbor, and let's see how that love can be fleshed out differently.
It seems like that thing of being a neighbor and helping from the inside and not coming from the outside and helping is partly so essential because a lot of people, when they are coming for help of some sort, whether it's a food pantry or whatever it is, there's a degree of embarrassment there and shame.
Oh, yeah.
And to, to say, hey, yeah, I can help you with your groceries, but, why don't we talk about the underlying issue of why you seem to need groceries anyway? Like, that's a really hard sell.
Right.
And seems like that's part of the necessity of being an insider instead of an outsider.
Yeah, I mean, when it feels like a stranger who's just trying to peer into your I mean, like, even people that I know looking into my like financial records or my investments or whatever, it just feels vulnerable. It's like, whoa,
sure,
we're not supposed to see that, and so just thinking about, if I'm already vulnerable, which is embarrassing, I feel like I'm exposed for my impotence to provide, and then I'm sitting with a stranger who's never gone through what I'm going through, and they're trying to somehow case manage me in some way to figure out the solution to my problem. Yeah, that's just really uncomfortable, and I don't think anybody wants to be in that position. And so the challenge is to say, like, what if because in that model, the people who are distributing the resource, they've decided what the problem is, and they've created the mechanism to address the problem pretty much usually on their own. And the only role that the quote poor have is showing up as recipient. But in FCS's model, they're saying, no, from the beginning, we do this in partnership. So like, if our neighbors are saying we need to deal with this, we say, awesome, let's deal with it together. How should we deal with that? Well, what if we tried this? Absolutely, let's give it a try. Hey, we know this guy in downtown. He works on stuff like this all the time. Can we bring him to the table? Do you mind if he comes in as a resource person to maybe shape this conversation? Sure, bring him in. Let's have a conversation. So from the beginning, it's a shared definition of what's wrong. It's a shared creation of a process to address it. And so the people that are benefiting are all of us. And so part of the challenge of the traditional model, and I hear stories like just working with churches. I had the opportunity actually to consult with the church recently, and they had created a document that outlined the different ministries that they've been a part of for the last 30 years. And it was really incredible work that they had done to put all this together. And it was really interesting reading through it, and just a testimony of a lot of just compassionate, faithful, generous people. But one of the pieces of the narrative that showed it repeatedly was someone in our church noticed a particular need in our community and decided to go address it in this particular way. And just fundamentally, that's setting ourselves up to be in a kind of in a one-way giving scenario. And so FCS kind of tries to invite people to say, well, let's from the beginning let the community define what needs to be addressed, and then let's find ways to address it together. And so you don't end up with a charity provider and a charity recipient kind of relationship. You end up with kind of it's mutual leadership, it's mutual decision making, it's mutual authority. And so there's nobody that feels like they're the disempowered receiving generosity from the empowered. And we try to break down those dynamics.
Another dichotomy is measuring the individuals or an individual story versus measuring the impact of the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that FCS has come up with a tool for kind of an index for kind of measuring the health of the neighborhood. What's the significance there? And what's explain the dichotomy between measuring an individual's success versus the neighborhood's?
Yeah. So, part of, and so some of this is part of rooted in, I mean, the story of community development as a whole, but even very specifically in Bob Lupton's story, that he came back from Vietnam with this deep sense of calling of God's heart for the poor, and that he wanted to live his life in that reality. And he specifically felt called to urban neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. And he started out working with youth. And it was like, man, I'm not really going to be able to affect these youth long term unless I engage their families. So he begins to engage their families. End up getting a PhD in psychology. I mean, and so like he's working on family counseling and and then it didn't take long because, man, if even if I'm helping this one family, if they're caught in a neighborhood environment that is unhealthy, that is divorced from the systems of economy and jobs and opportunity, then what am I really able to do? And so that's kind of in a one man's story is kind of the narrative of community development that says that like people exist in systems, they exist in neighborhoods, they exist in communities, and we have to ask what factors create health. And so if, for example, I come alongside, a young man who I want to mentor and develop and see his life kind of break some of the patterns of poverty that he's grown up in. If I help him make it through school, get into college, find a job, and he, moves on into some other community, the toxic realities of systemic poverty are unaffected by that. One guy gets out, and one guy's life situation improves, but the community kind of basically stays the same. And so the challenge is how do we address the factors that are happening within a neighborhood that create this kind of perpetual sense of poverty that we might find somewhere. Because most of the neighborhoods that you find that you would look just driving through, well, this is a poor neighborhood. Probably wouldn't have to go back too far in history when it was a thriving neighborhood. And you have to go, well, what happened that this became a thriving place of economy and jobs and church and community and all this kind of stuff. And now we're seeing a lot of joblessness, a lot of vacant homes, et cetera, et cetera. And so the community development model, FCS's model, tries to say, well, what are the factors at large that are going on here that are allowing this systemic poverty to continue, and then try to get involved at that type of level.
One of the other things that FCS emphasizes is the role of wealth creators,
right,
and using business practices, I guess you could say, to develop neighborhoods, and even churches who are doing ministries to embrace those business practices.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the ways that we could really kind of ignite some real passion and energy in local churches, because I think there's a sense to where people who have the skill or the desire for kind of interpersonal, almost like pastoral engagement with families or individuals who are struggling, those tend to be the ones that respond to the call to mission, whether it's a mission trip or a service project or volunteer hours at a local nonprofit. And those people are amazing people, and we've got to continue to utilize and call those people and celebrate their gifts. But people at that level tend to think about that one person and that one particular point of pain, that symptom that they're experiencing, and how they can come alongside them and soothe that in some way. And so the challenge is to say, if we look at our churches and don't just ask for volunteers who have free time on Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock, but say, who out here has a skill, a profession that we could leverage for the sake of the mission of God in our world to bring about shalom and flourishing? Who could do that for our neighborhood? Who could do that for this city? Who could leverage their skill in business, their skill in creating jobs, their skill in creating wealth, to come alongside our neighbors and to see things change? Because I think if you ask anybody who's experiencing poverty, their desire is not to live their lives as a recipient of other people's charity. What they want is to be in a position to where they want what we all want, and that's to be able to make your own decisions and have your own life, and to have vocation, to have calling, to have a life, to have a neighborhood, to have your home, those kind of things. And so, but the reason that I have those things in my life is because there have been networks of people surrounding me that have provided me with those opportunities and allowed me to create and enjoy a sustainable lifestyle with my family. And so we're looking for, who are the people that can walk through a neighborhood and not just see maybe empty homes or people who need some free food, but can walk through a neighborhood and say, man, if we took that abandoned property right there and we turned it into a business that did this, not only would it improve just the climate and the culture of the neighborhood and give some excitement to that, it could provide 37 jobs, and it could boost the economy of this local neighborhood. So people that just know how to look at a place and say, we can create wealth here, we can create jobs here, we can create opportunity here, not just we can create a mechanism to give things away. And so I think we've done a disservice to the church in that when we make calls out for mission, we have kind of a limited view of what that call can include, versus saying, like, you don't have to get on an airplane and fly to the developing world and do a VBS for children. Like, you can take your great, immense business skill and leverage that right here in the city we're living in ways that can just do profound good for families that live in our neighborhood.
I think that was so much more fulfilling for those people who do those things. If we say, hey, take this skill that you probably like doing, and do it for good. I mean, hopefully you're doing it for good already, but you know what I mean? Instead of, VBS, which we all agree is horrible.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's like, if we're asking people to turn off, I mean, this is part of a theology of work, right? That says that work existed before the fall. And so work is good. It is fulfilling. It is rich. It is spiritual. It is just nurturing. And we want all people to work and to have fulfilling work, and to ask them, like, can you use that skill for the kingdom of God in this place? Rather than, when it's time to do, quote, mission, turn off all of your education, your training, your vocation, your skills, your professionalism, turn all that off and just volunteer on a Saturday for this service project. And there are places for community cleanup service projects or whatever they are, and we can all do those. But, like, what you want is for God's mission and your vocation to be in alignment with each other in ways that really do the most good in the world. And that's what we want. We want it to be a mutual, that all people are kind of thriving in the midst of this. And I think that's the exciting piece. I mean, I'm not a wealth creator. Like, if my family were dependent upon me starting and running a successful business, we would be the ones going, somebody help us, because but there are some people that can just look at something and turn a profit. And that's one thing that Bob has used as language that, like, when he first said it, I was like, wait a second, that goes against my seminary training here. when he talked about the spiritual wealth creation, the people that can take situations and create wealth and opportunity. Now, that makes me nervous because I so easily associate wealth creation with kind of like unhindered capitalism that's just about the pursuit of more and more and more and more at the expense of the people at the bottom. Like, let's pay as low wages as we possibly can so that the people at the top get as much as they can. But in the book Charity Detox, he talks a lot about how do we create wealth in ways that are ethical and that are just, that are for the shalom and flourishing of all of us, and not just for a few of us at the top. And so if we can take something that America does well, which is business and wealth creation, but do it in a way that's infused with the pursuit of God's kingdom in a particular place, it's pretty incredible to think about the possibilities that can emerge from that.
I want to talk briefly about gentrification. And so many of us have a really hard time wrapping our heads around the damage that can do, the pain that it can cause. And I don't want to assume any prior knowledge on behalf of our listeners, so maybe you could just break down just what exactly it is, the definition, and then talk about how it can harm, and how, if we are moving into communities, how we add to them positively.
Right. Yeah. So Gentrification, easiest way to think about it is just kind of the the root of the word, the gentry, kind of the wealthy landowners. So the idea of gentrification is like, hey, you've got a neighborhood that looks fairly distressed, and you've got wealthy, resource people moving into that neighborhood. And where gentrification rightfully can have a very negative connotation is that you've got a lot of amazing people with a lot of incredible strengths and asset who live in what appears to be this poor, broken down neighborhood, and so you have the middle to upper class folks moving in, buying up fairly cheap property, gentrifying the neighborhood, and so what happens is the person who has potentially lived in that neighborhood for I mean, they could be 80 years old, lived there from the day that they were born. All of a sudden, property taxes go up. All kinds of things can happen that they can no longer afford to live in their community, and they're forced out. So it's kind of like forced migration, that we take this neighborhood that's been a lot of times historically African American neighborhood, and over time different factors change. Stuff happens in this particular neighborhood, becomes appears to be a distressed community, and then for whatever reason that particular neck of the city begins to be an appealing place to live for upwardly mobile folks, and so they begin to buy up some of the cheaper property and redevelop. And so from the outside, people go, "Wow, look how cool this new corner of the city is! Look at all these cool shops and these local restaurants and these new office complexes. This is really great." But then you have this whole other group of people who tend to be minorities, tend to be poor, going, this was our community and we just got pushed out. So gentrification, when just a unplanned force of the market, can be very destructive when it's not done with intentionality, when it's not done with a lens towards justice and equality. And so when FCS talks about gentrification with justice, really what they prefer to say is just re-neighboring. I mean, cities across the United States have documented the way that the middle class just took a quick flight out of the city. As soon as roads are developed and cars become a norm for everyone to own, wealth moves out, and the cities begin to suffer from that. The invitation is to say, we can't deal with poverty from a distance. We can't deal with it as an issue. It's about people. It's about relationships. It's about community. So there's this invitation to relocate, to re-neighbor. So whether that means you've never lived in an urban neighborhood before, so you're relocating into that context, or it means you're returning. Maybe you grew up there, got a job, moved off. The invitation is to come back, or a remainer, someone who has grown up in that neighborhood and is desperately trying to get out, is given a new vision for what it means to stay put in that challenged community, and to seek the health of that community with their relationships as a neighbor and with their vocation. And so to do gentrification well means that it's done in very careful and cautious partnership with the community that's there. FCS did not come in to try to rename, rebrand, or redefine South Atlanta as some sort of new cool hipster destination in Atlanta. They want South Atlanta to be historic South Atlanta. They celebrate South Atlanta. They celebrate the historic nature of that community. They want the things that have marked that community from its beginning to stay true. I mean, most of the roads in South Atlanta are named after historic leaders and professors that once lived there, and they want to promote the legacy of stuff like that. They're not coming in to try to redefine it according to what an upper middle class white person might think a cool neighborhood would look like. They want that neighborhood to be the best that neighborhood wants it to be. But the reality is, if you're in a neighborhood that's under-resourced, you're going to have resourced families living in that neighborhood if that community is going to experience a lift economically. In Charity Detox, Lupton will talk about moving the poverty needle. If you're going to move the poverty needle in a community, you have to have resourced families moving back into that community to become neighbors, but not in a way that's disempowering, not in a way that's like some sort of takeover, but in a way that's saying, we're coming in to be neighbors to you. I mean, so right now in Atlanta, there's a major redevelopment because Arthur Blank is building new Falcon Stadium. not too far. It's a $1 billion complex that's being built pretty close to the one that the Georgia Dome that currently exists. And there are a number of under-resourced neighborhoods right within that stadium. And so there are a lot of foundations and major companies and corporations talking about revitalization. Now, if you listen to neighbors who live in those neighborhoods, when they hear the word revitalization, it sounds like hostile takeover. It doesn't sound like, oh, tomorrow is going to be a brighter, better day. The way that it sounds like, no, they're coming in to take over our neighborhood. And I identify with that. I would rather have my neighborhood look the way that it does, but it still be mine, than for somebody to come in with their vision for what it ought to be, and dump a bunch of money on top of it to try to make it better for the tourists who come in to see a football game. And so there's a sense to where, like, we believe in neighborhood revitalization, but we believe in doing it intimately and in partnership with our neighbors, and not we don't do things to our neighbors or for our neighbors. We try to do it with our neighbors, and we feel there's a profound distinction between those.
It seems like part of what you're saying is the negative gentrification is not merely the moving of one outside group into a different group, but kind of the bulldozing of that culture as you move in.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of thinking about that. And some of this just depends on what city, not even just what city, what part of the city you're dealing with, because some of the places where FCS finds themselves in conversation, um, like South Atlanta right now, is not in danger of being overrun with kind of an upper middle class, culture coming in to ruin the rich and beautiful culture that's already there. Now, that's definitely true. The neighborhood my dad grew up in Nashville is kind of seeing more of that, like, it was this, it's that, now it's this other thing, but the gentrification is kind of happening. So, I mean, there are places where it's going, man, this is really unhealthy and something needs to be done. But there are lots of, so Atlanta's made up of about 200 and I think 42 separate kind of little identifiable neighborhoods that make up the city. And there are a good number of them that, like, gentrification is not something we're looking at that's this major market force that's doing damage. Now, it is happening in some places, but so some of it's kind of like neighborhood to neighborhood. There are just broader factors. Like, is this just a market trend where one group is looking to kind of revitalize something and make it their own? Or is this a group of people who are saying, no, we want to preserve the identity, the strengths and the culture of this place, and we're asking to become a part of their community. We're not asking to make it more like what we want it to be.
You know, one of the things that I've thought about gentrification a lot is that there's not a singular, clear villain in the equation a lot of times.
Right.
There's an article I read maybe just yesterday about how hipsters aren't the bad guys in gentrification. Right. And it made a fair point. Hey, that struggling neighborhood's the only place they can find space to do their art or whatever.
Right.
It seems so tricky in that way. If we could just point to one thing that was
right
contributing, it could be easily or more easily dealt with.
Yeah. And I think we would advise, like, if because it's becoming much more common for young families, young adults to live in the city, and that's just kind of that trend that the market is seeing, for better, for worse, whatever it's going to mean. That's a change that's going on. And so, I advise anybody that whether they have moved into a place like that because they were thinking about some sort of long-term community development project, or they were just like, it was affordable and it's close to my work, I just encourage those people to say, rather than looking around at, like, man, look at all the houses that are vacant, or look at that lot that looks kind of trashy, like, to say, what's the history of this place? Who can I get to know that's lived here maybe longer than I've been alive? How can I build a relationship with them? How can I hear the story of what's going on? What neighborhood associations or civic groups already exist that are trying to work on beautifying this neighborhood, and can I support them in some way? I mean, I'm a part of something called the Neighboring Initiative, and we were looking at just this very specific thing in a lot of ways. And one of the neighborhoods that we spent some time in is Pittsburgh, not Pennsylvania, but there's a small neighborhood called Pittsburgh in the city of Atlanta, if that's not confusing enough. And so just this historic neighborhood in the city of Atlanta. And if you just drove through real quick, you'd be like, good grief, what a terrible neighborhood. Because you would see there's a large number of homes that are boarded up. And you would just assume this is a dangerous place. So you make all kinds of assumptions. But like if you park your car and you go inside the house of a family there and you begin to listen, it blows your mind just the amazing work that's being done by the community that's organizing itself to work. And the funny thing is that the reason there are parts of that community that look the way that they do, it's not because the neighbors just don't care and aren't doing things. There are companies that own those lots that are refusing to do anything with them because they're waiting for the market to turn so they can make big bank off of that. So so what appears to be some sort of blight that is some sort of comment on the character of the community has nothing to do with them because they're working their tails off to make that place as great as they can make it, but they're dealing with factors that are out of their control. And so I mean, if it is a young person or young family that's moved into the city, I'd say take some time to really slow down and pay attention. That there's a history here that you could potentially be invited into to be a part of, and to kind of find out what is the vision of the neighbors who've lived here a long time versus maybe what my vision might be for where I live.
That's such good advice, Shawn. I mean, the difference between that and asking, how can I get a Starbucks across the street is a lot. There's a huge difference there.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about EIRO, the organization that you co-founded.
Yeah, so the part of the city that I live in is kind of on the northeast corner of Atlanta, which in the early 60s was where suburban flight landed to some extent. That has long since been the case as far as a qualifying descriptor of what our community looks like. It is. I don't even know what the latest count is on the number of languages that make up my kids' school and the cluster of schools that are in our community. It's just this rapidly changing part of the world that we're living in. And so, and part of that we have seen is that churches, whether intentionally or not, and most of the time not intentionally, just have not really been able to keep pace with the rapid nature of changes in the community. And so we see lots of vibrant things that are going on, lots of good possibilities in our community, and a large number of those churches fairly disconnected from what's taking place. And so our heart has always been for the local church, believing in some unique way that God's mission of redemption is somehow most leveraged through these local bodies of his people that are scattered all throughout the corners of our neighborhoods. And so our desire is just to come alongside local churches and try to invite them back into the neighborhood in some way, and to do that in a way that's dignifying and healthy. So it's not just about engaging the community, but it's about doing it in a way that's dignifying and healthy. And so just trying to find ways to build partnerships between churches and also build partnerships between churches and local community leaders and community entities and assets and those types of things. So spend a lot of time just doing a lot of networking and coaching and guiding churches into relationship with one another and guiding those churches into relationship with the community.
So for everybody listening, I'm going to have links to a number of things here. FCS, EIRO, the books that we mentioned that Bob Lupton wrote. And Shawn, we could probably talk for a few more hours if we had the time. In closing, is there anything else that you think is important to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I would just say I think when you first begin to be aware of the complexity of poverty, become aware of maybe the ineffectiveness of traditional charity models, it can be paralyzing. There can be a number of responses to these things. One is to become a critic. Now that you're kind of aware of what makes charity unhealthy, you just walk around pointing out why everybody's unhealthy and what they're doing, and why those things don't work, and they should be more informed. But there's also just the paralysis that says, like, if this model doesn't work, it's the only model I know, so what do I do now? To not let those feelings overcome them, but to say, start relationally. Don't start with how am I going to solve all of this tomorrow with a few of my friends, but to say what relationships currently don't exist in my life that need to exist before I can engage in work that's going to really be healthy, and start there. And I think that'll lead to a lot of good places. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with FCS is also to offer some workshops, training, consulting that just helps people say, hey, I've been doing this nonprofit for 10 years, and I am deeply convinced that we need to do it differently, but I don't even know how to how to chart the course from where we are to where we need to go. That's why I'm here. That's why FCS has created this position and this opportunity is to come alongside churches and nonprofits to offer training, to offer workshops. So just with the link to the FCS website, you can also stick my email address in those links, and people that can reach out to me and would love to come alongside churches or nonprofits that are trying to find a healthier and more meaningful way of engaging their neighbors.
Awesome. That's great. And I'll just, for anybody listening, that address for this blog is going to be shaneblackshear.com/Shawn Duncan. So they can check out, if you only remember one thing, remember that, and you can get all the links there. And I'll have Shawn's email address. One of the things I was thinking when you were just talking was, it might be that people listening are thinking that these books we mentioned, these organizations are only for people who are, into social work and things like that. I really think every believer needs to be schooled in this on some level. And I think the books that we mentioned are great primers on that. And almost every church in America has some kind of food pantry or a relationship with one.
Yeah.
And two, it's not even so much sometimes that these things could be done better, but the things we're doing are actively harming the people that we're trying to help.
Yeah. And what makes Bob Lupton, whether it's in his writing or just him as a person, so compelling is his stories. And so these books that we're talking about are just really compelling. They're on one level easy reading that you don't have to be a community development professional or seminarian or whatever. But they're also challenging on the level that it really forces you to consider things in really new and fresh ways that can really be hard to process because it's such an important thing to process. And I would really encourage to engage those whatever lens you're coming at, whether you've done charity work for 20 years or you've never done it before. And I think these books are becoming more and more important because charity, social entrepreneurship, poverty, it's now trendy to be engaged in some sort of social ministry activity, social justice cause. And I'm glad to see that impulse is now like a commonly accepted expectation that we're engaged in some sort of social endeavor to improve the world. And I'm all behind that. That's more of a common impulse that we see today. But it can also be a very misguided impulse. And so, like wherever you're coming at, these are really important stories that I think once you get past some of the challenges that it's forcing you to think with a new paradigm, it becomes really exciting at the innovative new waves that we can begin to engage our neighborhoods that are going to actually lead to transformative impact and not just 7,000 pounds of food handed out this year. And it's just really exciting what could happen when we engage all of our vocational capacities in God's redemptive mission in the world. And I'm excited about what can happen there.
Well, Shawn, it's been so great to talk with you. Thanks for taking time to be on the show.
Yeah, man, good to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at beardonabike. That's at Beard on a Bike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/Shane Blackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.